The Imperial Star Palace floated high above a blue gas giant, shining like a crown made of metal and light, but on this day it felt more like a trap than a symbol of power. Sirens wailed through its long halls, and warning lights flashed as space itself seemed to tear open outside the massive windows. From those wounds in the dark came the Zarkal swarm, living warships shaped like sharp bones and black shells, moving together like a storm with a single hungry mind. Every empire in the galaxy feared them, because wherever the swarm arrived, worlds went silent forever. Inside the palace, rulers, admirals, and alien leaders rushed into the main council chamber, their faces tense with fear and anger, knowing this meeting might be their last. Each table in the room was carefully placed, marked by rank and bloodline, and guarded by armed soldiers who made sure no one sat where they did not belong. Into this place of power walked Jacques Marin, a poor human mechanic from the lowest docks, a man more used to broken engines than golden halls. He had been repairing a failing power line when an officer, desperate and panicked, pushed him forward and shouted for him to sit before running away. Confused and nervous, Jacques dropped into the nearest empty chair without looking, only to feel the room freeze around him as if time itself had stopped. The table he had chosen belonged to the Emperor's family, a place no common worker was allowed to touch. Across from him sat Princess Lyra, the Emperor's daughter, her body still and fragile in a floating medical chair, thin cables connecting her spine to humming machines. Though her legs did not move and her hands shook slightly, her eyes were sharp and full of intelligence, watching everything with quiet strength. Guards raised their weapons at once, nobles shouted in outrage, and the Emperor himself rose from his seat, his face dark with anger and disbelief at the sight of a grease-stained human sitting beside his daughter. Before anyone could give an order, the palace shook violently as a massive explosion echoed through space, throwing people against walls and tables. Outside, one of the defense fleets vanished in a flash of fire, torn apart by the first wave of the swarm. The lights flickered, the floor trembled, and fear swept through the chamber like a cold wind. In that moment, rank and rule suddenly felt small compared to the danger closing in. Princess Lyra broke the silence with a calm, steady voice, telling Jacques he was not meant to be there, not with anger, but with curiosity. Jacques answered honestly, saying mistakes followed him everywhere, even into places like this. Another rocked the palace, reminding everyone that death was moving closer with every second. The Emperor looked around the room, seeing fear even in his strongest generals, and for the first time understood that the old rules might not save them now. The war had begun not with a proud speech or planned attack, but with chaos, fear, and a single poor mechanic sitting at the wrong table, unknowingly stepping into a moment that would decide the fate of the galaxy. The chamber was still shaking when the Emperor ordered the guards to take the human away, his voice sharp with anger and fear. Yet before the soldiers could move, Princess Lyra slowly lifted her hand, her fingers trembling but her will clear, and she asked them to stop, a simple request that carried more weight than any command. The Emperor hesitated, because he knew his daughter's mind had saved fleets and worlds before her body had failed her. And in that pause the war map came alive above the table, filling the air with glowing shapes and terrible news. Red marks spread across the system as the Zarkal swarm poured in from every direction, their living ships moving with cruel purpose, cutting off escape routes and smashing through defense lines that had been trusted for generations. Generals spoke quickly and loudly, sharing numbers that sounded like death sentences, explaining how shields would fail within hours and how ground forces would not stand a chance once the swarm reached the station. Fear hung heavy in the air, thick enough to choke on, and even the proudest leaders felt small before the coming destruction. Jacques Marin stood there quietly, feeling out of place among uniforms and titles. Yet his eyes followed the glowing map with deep focus, because broken systems and failing machines were things he understood better than fear. When he spoke, his voice was low and unsure at first, but it cut through the noise by pointing out that the shields were not truly weak, only pushed too hard for too long, treated like dead metal instead of living fields that needed balance. Some officers laughed at the idea of a poor mechanic correcting the Empire's finest minds, but Princess Lyra leaned forward, her eyes bright with interest, and asked him to explain more. Jacques used his hands to show invisible lines, describing how small pauses and changes in rhythm could let the shields absorb enemy fire and turn it into strength rather than loss, much like letting a tired heart rest between beats. As he spoke, the laughter faded and silence returned, replaced by the uneasy feeling that this simple man might be right. The Emperor studied the map again, then his daughter, and finally Jacques, realizing that desperate times demanded unheard voices, and he gave the order to try the mechanic's idea. Across the palace and defense platforms, engineers rushed to change shield patterns while the swarm continued its advance, tearing apart outer fleets with brutal ease. Moments later, the shields flared brighter than before, bending under enemy attacks but refusing to break, and a wave of shocked relief spread through the command room as the palace survived another deadly strike. Princess Lyra allowed herself a small smile, knowing this victory was only temporary but meaningful all the same, and she asked Jacques why he remained so calm while standing in the heart of a dying empire. He answered simply that a life spent near failure teaches a person not to fear it, because fear does not fix what is broken. Outside, the enemy seemed to sense the change, their movements shifting as they adapted with terrifying speed, proving that this war would not be won easily or quickly. As the chamber filled again with alarms and urgent voices, it became clear that the mechanic's words had not only strengthened the shields, but cracked the old belief that power belonged only to those born to it, marking the moment when hope first pushed back against despair in the face of the swarm. The core chamber lay deep within the Imperial Star Palace, a place few ever entered, and as Jacques Marin stepped inside, the air felt heavy and alive, humming with power strong enough to tear a body apart if mishandled. The walls glowed with harsh white light, and fixed streams of energy moved like rivers trapped behind glass, shaking harder with every second as the enemy dreadnought pulled closer. Warning alarms screamed without pause, but Jacques forced his hands to stay steady, knowing that panic would only speed the end. Outside the chamber, Princess Lyra's voice came through the calm but filled with fear she tried to hide, reminding him that he still had time to turn back, that another solution might exist. Jacques answered gently, telling her that some problems did not have safe answers, only necessary ones, and that his whole life had prepared him for moments when broken things needed someone willing to stand close to danger. He moved from panel to panel, ripping out damaged parts, bypassing safety locks, and using simple tools to guide forces that were never meant to be touched by human hands. Each step sent pain through his body as heat burned his skin and the floor trembled beneath him, but he focused on the rhythm of the core, listening to it like a mechanic listens to an engine about to fail. Through a small window, he could see the dreadnought growing larger, its massive form bending space around it, drawing in ships that vanished like dust, while enemy fire slammed against the palace shields in endless waves. Princess Lyra guided fleets with one hand while gripping her chair with the other, refusing to look away from the feed showing Jacques at work, her heart torn between duty and the growing fear of losing him. When the Emperor offered to take Jacques' place, she stopped him without hesitation, reminding him that leadership sometimes meant letting others choose their own sacrifice. Jacques reached the final control point as the core's vibration turned violent, knowing that once he began the tuning, escape would no longer be possible. He spoke one last time, not with fear, but with quiet acceptance. saying that for once his mistakes had led him somewhere that mattered. As enemy fire struck the palace with enough force to crack armor, Jax adjusted the final settings by hand, feeling the energy surge through him like fire and thunder combined. The core answered, its light growing blinding as it released a powerful wave that tore through space itself, spreading outward faster than thought. In that instant, the dreadnought froze, its living system stunned and broken. And across the system the swarm ships faltered, their perfect coordination shattered. The palace shook violently as systems failed and power drained away, and Jax collapsed to the floor, his body broken but his task complete. As darkness closed in, the last sound he heard was Princess Lyra calling his name across the stars. And though pain consumed him, there was peace in knowing that a poor mechanic standing alone had stopped a monster that entire fleets could not, proving that even in the face of endless darkness, a single human act could change the fate of the galaxy. The battle outside the Imperial Star Palace grew fierce and wild, turning the dark of space into a storm of fire, light, and falling wrecks. As human ships rushed forward to meet the enemy with speed and courage that surprised even their allies. Small fighters moved like sparks, dodging massive living vessels of the Zarkal swarm, while heavy cruisers fired long lines of bright energy that cut through the void. Explosions bloomed again and again, shaking the palace as if giants were striking its walls, and the sound of alarms never stopped. Inside, Jax Marin was pulled from the council chamber and sent wherever systems were failing, crawling through narrow tunnels filled with smoke and heat, using simple tools to hold together power lines that were melting under stress. He worked without rest, because every repair meant another second of life for thousands of people, and he felt the weight of that truth with every breath. At the same time, Princess Lyra sat before glowing screens, her body still bound to her medical chair, but her mind racing faster than any computer, watching enemy patterns and guiding fleets through narrow chances of survival. She spoke calmly to pilots facing death, turning fear into focus, and again her orders saved ships that should have been lost. The swarm answered this resistance with cruelty, releasing clouds of small razor creatures that swarmed over hulls, cutting into metal and flesh alike, while massive bioships opened their sides to launch burning beams that ripped stations apart. Just as hope began to form, space itself bent and darkened near the edge of the system, and from that twisted place emerged something far worse than before, a living dreadnought so vast it blocked the stars behind it. Its surface pulsed like a giant heart, and its low, deep sound shook sensors and bones alike, spreading fear through every mind that heard it. Gravity twisted around the monster, pulling debris, ships, and even parts of the palace toward it, as if the creature wished to swallow everything at once. Voices in the command center fell silent, because no weapon they had was built to fight something that large and alive. Jax, bruised and exhausted, was dragged back into the chamber as systems failed faster than they could be repaired. And when he saw the dreadnought on the screens, he understood that normal solutions would not save them. Studying the readings, he noticed how the palace's ancient power heart, built long ago by human hands, reacted to the creature's presence, vibrating in strange patterns that matched its gravity waves. With shaking determination, Jax spoke up again, explaining that the core could be pushed into a controlled overload, not to explode, but to send a powerful shock through space itself, a sound strong enough to stun the dreadnought's mind. The idea terrified everyone, because the core was the heart of the palace, and touching it wrong could mean instant death for all. Princess Lyra listened closely, seeing both the danger and the chance hidden in his words, while the Emperor struggled with the choice before him. Time was running out as the dreadnought moved closer, opening massive structures that looked like a mouth ready to feed, and the swarm pressed their attack harder than ever. In that moment, Fear and hope stood side by side, and it became clear that survival would demand not just weapons, but sacrifice, courage, and the willingness to risk everything on one desperate human idea. The moment the great shock wave passed through the system, everything changed, as if the universe itself had taken a sharp breath and then released it. The Zarkal swarm, once moving with perfect unity, began to drift and stumble, their living ships colliding or going silent as the unseen force shattered the shared mind that guided them. Human commanders saw the opening at once and gave the order to attack with everything that remained, turning fear into fury as battered fleets surged forward. Fighters flew through burning debris, pilots shouting with raw emotion as they pushed damaged engines beyond their limits, knowing this was the only chance they would ever have. Larger ships followed, firing heavy weapons again and again, tearing open enemy hulls that could no longer react in time. Boarding teams launched across open space, cutting their way into alien vessels and destroying them from the inside, using courage and quick thinking instead of perfect plans. Across every open channel, human voices cried out in defiance, not as a signal of victory, but as a declaration that they refused to fall quietly. The massive dreadnought, once unstoppable, hung frozen like a dead star, and brave soldiers entered its vast interior, fighting through strange living corridors until they reached its core and ended it forever. As the swarm lost control, many of their ships fled into deep space, while others were hunted down and destroyed, ending a terror that had lasted for centuries. Inside the palace, emergency teams raced through damaged halls and fallen walls, searching for survivors while fires burned and systems failed. They found Jax Marin in the ruined core chamber, his body broken and badly burned, yet still alive against all odds, as if stubborn will alone had refused to let him die. Medics rushed him into care, working without rest as the palace drifted safely away from danger, saved by the sacrifice he had chosen. When the war finally ended, silence spread across the system, heavy and unreal after so much noise and death, and the survivors struggled to understand that they were still breathing. Days turned into weeks as repairs began, and news of the victory spread across the galaxy, telling the story of how humanity had stood against the swarm and refused to break. In a quiet medical chamber, Princess Lyra visited Jax, sitting beside his bed as machines kept him alive, and for the first time since the battle, she allowed her strong mask to fall away. She spoke softly about what he had done, about the lives he had saved, and about how his choice had given the galaxy a future. Jax, weak but aware, answered with a small smile, saying that fixing broken things was all he had ever known, and that this time the broken thing had simply been much larger. Lyra promised him that he would not face the future alone, that human and alien knowledge together could help heal what the battle had destroyed, including his shattered body. As the palace continued to repair itself, one truth became clear to all who had survived: that humanity's greatest strength did not lie only in weapons or numbers, but in the will to fight on when hope seemed gone, to turn desperation into action, and to stand tall in the face of extinction. Years passed after the great battle, and the galaxy slowly learned how to breathe again, rebuilding worlds that had been scarred and filling empty skies with new ships and quiet hope. Where the old Imperial Star Palace once floated, a new station now stood, stronger and simpler, built not as a symbol of untouchable power, but as a place where voices from many worlds could meet without fear. Inside its main hall there were no long tables marked by rank or birth, only wide circles of seats meant to remind everyone that survival had come from unity rather than pride. At the heart of this hall sat Princess Lyra, no longer bound to silence or stillness, standing with the help of human-built frames that responded to her thoughts, a sign of what could be achieved when knowledge was shared instead of guarded. Beside her sat Jax Marin, his body still marked by pain and loss, yet strong again, his hands steady as ever, now leading engineers from many species who followed his ideas with respect instead of doubt. When the Emperor spoke to the gathered worlds, his voice carried humility shaped by war. And he told the story of how a single mistake had changed everything. How a poor mechanic had once sat where he did not belong and shown the galaxy that wisdom could come from anywhere. The crowd listened in silence as he explained that old systems of power had nearly destroyed them, and that survival had come only when they allowed new voices to be heard. Humanity's role in the war became legend, not because of cruelty or conquest, but because of resilience, creativity, and the refusal to give up when faced with impossible odds. Human engineers were welcomed across the stars, known as those who fixed what others abandoned, who stayed behind when escape was easier, and who believed that broken things still deserved care. Jox and Lyra worked together to guide this new future, balancing strength with compassion, each understanding loss and sacrifice in their own way. Though pain never fully left Jox's body and Lyra's steps were never effortless, neither saw themselves as victims, but as proof that survival came with a cost worth paying. Stories of the war were told to new generations, not as tales of perfect heroes, but as reminders that courage often appeared in ordinary people at unexpected moments. Whenever someone questioned their place or worth, elders would repeat the lesson learned at terrible cost, that no seat defined destiny and no voice should be ignored simply because it came from the wrong place. The galaxy moved forward, changed forever, carrying the memory of fire and loss, yet guided by the simple truth that saved it all, that when darkness rises and rules fail, it is often the hands of a quiet mechanic, reaching out to fix the impossible, that hold the future together.